at you from the 37th parallel on America's haunted highway. It's Pixelated Paranormal, your guide to the unusual and the strange.
Welcome to Pixelated Paranormal, Episode 3. And I am joined today by Preston.
Hello, everybody.
And Sean.
Hello, hello.
I feel like I almost forgot Sean's name there. That was really sad. And I, of course, am Robert, or Henderson Man. We're coming to you today with some stories of the supernatural variety. Sean's gonna relay some stories about monkey stuff. Preston's got giants. And I got a few other stories to hit. But the first thing I want to hit on, though, is I apologize to anybody last episode that listened to me ramble on about the time travel story, because I was totally wrong about that story. Just this past week on Coast to Coast AM, they actually had the guy that wrote a book about it. And what I thought was one incident was actually two different incidents 6 months apart. That's the reason why the M6 was in the UK and the other accident was in France. So, long story short, I fucked that story up royally. And so if you guys want to look into that, the story was very confusing on the website I was reading about, and it didn't seem like it was clear that it was two stories. So, but I totally apologize if anybody was really confused about that, but I wanted to get that out there, and hopefully, we can shed some light that was a messed up story. I don't know what I was doing there, but don't let it be known, I admit my mistakes. So, so we're going to delve into some stuff, and the first story I came across that kind of interests me, everyone here has ever heard of Area 51. Well, there's a gentleman that passed away in 2009. He had a video out where he talked about working at Area 51, and not only that, he worked with a gray alien that they all called J-Rod. And he basically said that he worked there with an alien from 1969 to 1979. And his whole job was basically, they were trying to build a flight simulator for pilots, based off alien technology. So they were trying to build fighter jets or whatever with reverse engineered alien technology, and the gray alien that they called J-Rod, he supposedly was their translator and scientific advisor, basically. And he said that they talked to them through telepathy, but to project their thoughts, they had to use a device that was basically translates their thoughts to his language. So a really confusing way, because we always hear these stories about the Greys and stuff. They always communicate with you. What if they really can't understand what we're saying? That's kind of an interesting theory. When you're trying to talk to them and they're like, I don't know what this dude's saying. Cut him open, take his sperm, whatever. Get him out of here. But he said that there were three different types of Greys, which we've kind of heard that before. The tall Greys, the short Greys, and then just the Greys, like the normal sized people. He also said
Goldilocks likes.
Yeah,
don't forget that there's also the robotic Greys that are made by the American government. Yeah. Those aren't real Greys.
So, but I'm just going by what he says right now. And he said that basically there's also the reptilians as well. And he says in his story that basically they were working with the government because their races would both be going extinct if they didn't find some way to crossbreed with us. which I don't. When I always hear that, I always think that's odd, because what do we have that would protect an alien race so that they wouldn't, perish? It doesn't make much sense to me. But apparently J-Rod was a survivor of a crashed UFO, and that's how the government found out about him. So it sounded like he was pretty much the government had, basically made a deal with them basically to say, hey, we'll let you abduct humans and do experiments on a few humans so that you can figure out how to do this. And in response, the aliens, Greys, gave us access to technology that we could put into our own. I mean, it's a story we've heard before. The man was 70 years old when he passed away, so, I mean, I don't know if it was a deathbed confession, but he says that the aliens pretty much have reneged on their taking in abductions and stuff, that basically our government can't do anything to stop them. So they've actually built bases in Dulce, New Mexico, which, we've all heard of Dulce, where the big alien bases are. So I mean, it seems to collaborate a lot of stuff that we hear from time to time. Whether any of this is true, of course, that's for you to determine, but it kind of made me think a little bit of Bob Lazar as well, because he said the same kind of things, because he worked at S4 supposedly in Groom Lake, which is part of an area of Area 51, and he also talked about how our government was working with Greys. So I mean, you can look into that story, but it's, who knows what the truth is. It's probably all utter nonsense, but still, it makes an interesting story.
Was he the one that wrote the story about Range 4 Harry?
I don't think so. I don't remember.
Okay, so anybody who hasn't heard of Range 4 Harry, you need to go look that up, because that is a top-notch alien story right there.
You don't? Oh man, I wish you had that on hand, because I don't think I've ever heard that story.
So, like, one of the alien bases around Nevada, Las Vegas, or whatever it is, there was reports of this like irradiated horse. He was like white and glowing, and they eventually, like, one of the military personnel made contact with him, and he ended up being like an alien. And so there's this whole conversation back and forth of this military police person with this irradiated horse named Range 4 Harry.
I've never heard that story.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Well, Preston, you had a story here about a robot takeover?
Yeah, so in the news recently, several companies have been posting about using robotics in their facilities for production, and one of the major companies recently to do it was Adidas. So here, either in Britain or the United States, one of their factories is going to go full robotics, and production is going to be done by robots. And then Elon Musk, who owns Tesla, stated in a conference for the shareholders last week that their production line sucks, their cars aren't that great, but instead of fixing the problem with the cars, they are going to fix the problems with the machines that are making the machines. And it seems like it's a trend now that we're kind of heading into, let's just get robots to do everything for us. Let's, get the robotic workers in, and let's make the robots do it. And so I wanted to see what your guys' thoughts on that were. Like, where do you think we're going to be in like 10 or 15 years? Like, are we all going to have job security, or are we going to be taken over by the robots?
Well, that's something that's always kind of frightened me a little bit, because it seems like you always hear these stories about, hey, robots could do all the work, but at some point, there's got to be a dividing line of when that's going to happen, and that's the scary thing, is if you got people not working here and people still having to work here, and they haven't quite met, what happens to the people in the middle as one gets squished down into the other? I mean, at what point are we going to let people starve because they can't get jobs before all the robots take over? I mean, it's a scary thought, and I'm pretty sure it's going to happen sooner than later.
You know, the McDonald's CEO had said something along the lines of, he could spend $40,000 on a robotic arm, and that robotic arm could do a better job of making sandwiches or hamburgers than raising the base pay to $15 for the minimum wage for a half-retarded worker. And so, I mean, what are all those little college kids and high school kids going to do for jobs? Or
how many people have those jobs now that are adults? I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, we're struggling as it is. You know, the world is. I mean, there are people that don't have jobs anymore, and you know they're underemployed. It's a scary place out there. I mean, the big corporations don't want to pay anybody anything more than they have to. We've got a immigrant movement that people think I'm racist when I say this, but I've seen it happen where you've got people that live 15 people to one apartment, and they send all their money back to their country because they just basically all live together, and that's true. That's happened. I mean, and you know that drives down wages and stuff. And I mean, I don't want to get real political here, but that's like one of the things that I disagree with most with like Bernie Sanders and other people is we do need to have a immigration kind of tapped down a little bit because it is affecting us, and people don't realize how much it's affecting us. And if we throw robots in there that can do our jobs, well, where does that leave the middle class? We don't have much of a middle class as it is anyway.
We all get jobs as robot techs. Someone's got to fix the robot.
If you think about like me and Sean, we're both in retail, and I mean they could easily replace us. You know, if the technology gets far enough advanced or it gets far enough along, they could easily replace us with robots. And then, like, what are we gonna do? So
yeah. So the robot takeover could be scary, and it could be a great thing. Could you imagine not having to work, or if you wanted, having everything provided to you? But then at what point?
I could disc golf all day long. I mean, the world would be a better place.
Well, but you got to also think, well, what happens to are robots going to do all the doctoring jobs and stuff like that? I mean, what about medical professions? I mean, that stuff's going to be harder to come by. So I don't know.
You've already got the robot surgery, the robot aided surgeries where you've got a doctor sitting back, but again, you've got a doctor operating said robot.
Right.
There was also I think, what was it, 2 years ago, there was a research company that was working with nanobots that they could actually have these little microscopic robots that could go in and do certain jobs and surgeries, and so they're progressing that technology along, and sooner or later you're not going to have to worry about having these high-end surgeons or anything along the lines of that because those jobs are going to be obsolete because we have the nanotechnology to go in there, and really you just need a technician to go in and push a button and then boom, it's a done deal.
Yeah, well, the scary thing is are we going to become like the Eloi and the Morlocks or from the Time Machine? Yeah. Is it, because, I mean, if we don't have anything to do, how dumb is our species going to get? I mean, somebody's got to fix and repair these robots unless they're going to have robots that repair robots. Ooh. And then what do they need us for? Oh my God, Skynet all over.
To look pretty in the human zoos that they're going to have. And, if we befriend these robots now, they'll take care of us in the long run.
Oh, my goodness.
Somebody hasn't read Isaac Asimov.
Just read the text messages. Oh, my God.
Yeah, let's get a robot to do that.
And Preston, did you have something else to say? Another story?
My other news story that I found had to do with King Tut. So there's been a lot in the news lately about his tomb possibly having another tomb hidden in it, and possibly the Queen Nefertiti. And there are so many people that are coming in and doing like readings and everything, and so you had the National Geographic Society that came in and had somebody do the radar, penetrating ground radar, and he wasn't able to release his findings because he's like, well, I have to wait for the National Geographic Society to release their information. And then you have the Egyptian Antiquity members, they're like, no, there's nothing there, don't worry about it. There's no extra tomb, it's just all bullcrap. And one of the articles that are in the news because of it was that there was a dagger found in his tomb back in the 20s when they opened it up, and there was no rust on it. So you have like this 2,000-year-old dagger that had no rust, and it was because that they actually had mined the iron from a meteorite. So because of the compound of nickel, cobalt, and then the actual iron, they had this metal combination that allowed the dagger not to rust and was in pristine condition for over 3,000 years. So I thought that was kind of interesting that, that they had this basically pristine dagger.
Huh, that's real interesting, but wow.
Were there other artifacts that were rusted?
Yeah, I mean, so they, like the ceremonial daggers, or there were certain things that weren't like mined from the meteorite, and so those were rusted, and then you had the daggers, and then like a couple swords that were actually mined from meteorites that that had this metal composition, so you could tell the difference in between the two.
Okay, gotcha.
So do you think that they made the dagger because it was a meteorite that came from space, or do you think they really wanted it to be pristine and stuff, and that's the reason why they realized that the rocks and stuff, the ore from...
I've always had this opinion that civilizations back then were more advanced than we'd like to give them credit for, so they knew a lot more than what we think of today, and so, I would think that they would know that metal composition would have that effect, and because it came down from the heavens and they knew that, because of what it was made of, it was going to last forever, that's why they chose to make that particular dagger from, the meteorite.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility, but, it's...
I mean, there's even studies showing that they're one of the first civilizations to actually use, the process called when you zap the gold with electricity, the gold plating.
Mm-hmm.
They were one of the first civilizations to actually come up with gold plating, and then we didn't rediscover that technology until like the 1800s or 1700s. So, They weren't monkey and loincloths. They were actually smart individuals.
Speaking of monkeys and loincloths,
who's got egg on their face now?
No, Sean, you had some stories that you looked into this week about different things, and they're kind of all monkey related. There's been a lot of monkeying around in the news, so...
There certainly has. Well, I'll go ahead with my news story. It's not necessarily monkey related, but it may resurface in a little while. So strap in and buckle up, because I'm going to take you for a ride. So the news I read was from the beginning of May, and it was from a company called BioQuark, which is a biotech company. They're boasting right now that they are beginning trials on a study with stem cells and tissue regeneration involving complex tissues and complex organs. The study is going to look into whether or not stem cells can be combined with peptides and injected into brains to erase damaged cells and promote new growth. The concept is going to be similar to that of like a salamander. If you would cut off a salamander's leg or an arm or a tail, those appendages
you'd have one pissed off salamander.
That's very true. So what they're going to do is take 20 patients who are clinically dead or brain dead, meaning there's no brain activity, they're just alive on life support. They're going to take these 20 patients and inject all 20 of them with this cocktail of stem cells and peptides. Over the course of 6 weeks, they'll give them injections bi-weekly. Now, what they're hoping to do, like I said earlier, is get these dead brain cells eradicated and then have the stem cells rebuild new fresh cells promoted by the healthy living cells already neighboring the dead cells. The problem is they don't know if they're going to be able to be successful with the first experiment, but what they're saying is it's going to kind of be a win-win situation. If they are able to go ahead and get the experiment to work the first time, well, then they've just discovered how to potentially reconstruct dead brain cells. And if they're not successful, at least they're going to be able to look into building this bridge to further the study of the brain and brain death and how to reverse that problem. And ultimately, that's going to lead to new breakthroughs with other complex tissue and organ regrowth and maybe even aging itself.
Right.
What do you guys think of
Actually,
that?
when I was sitting at line at Wendy's tonight, I was waiting for my food because there was like a 6-minute wait on spicy chicken sandwiches because, nobody orders them that late at night, so they have to cook them fresh. And so then they burn the shit out of your mouth. But that's not the important part. The important part is
the stem cell research to regrow your mouth tissue from burning
That's
it.
right. No, the reason why I brought this up is because I just had to be browsing through Reddit, and there was a science story on there that said basically they have discovered by injecting stem cells directly into the brain of stroke patients, it's starting to reverse the effects of strokes. So they're already finding results from this. So, and that's one of the most amazing things that people have talked about stem cells since they've been created is a lot of times people saying like pregnant women were becoming healed from having their fetus actually provide them with stem cells to repair damage to their body before the baby's born and stuff like that. So we're seeing a lot of research going into stem cells, and it's amazing that this is even happening because 20 years ago, people were arguing that, well, you can't get stem cells unless you take it from an aborted fetus, and now we've figured out ways to do the opposite. We don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
But it's nice that, 20 years ago when this is all coming up, now we're starting to see the fruits of this. And if it's possible that they can revive stroke patients, can they also reverse Alzheimer's with this? These are all very exciting possibilities. Because my grandmother, I watched her degrade from Alzheimer's and how horrible that is. And it's always worried me about my own mother because it runs in our family or even ourselves. I foresee if this works that we'll see a reversal of Alzheimer's, hopefully in the next 20 years. But
this company BioQuark says they're hoping to see huge leaps in the studies within the next 2 to 3 months. And that was one item on their agenda was, with these stem cell projects and studies, that's what they're hoping to do as well is further the advancement of Alzheimer's, stopping it where it's at so it doesn't progress any worse, and potentially, like the stroke victims, maybe reversing some of the damages, getting people back what they lost.
Did you say where this company's from?
I did not.
Because there was an article that I read maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago that was from a company from Sweden, and they've been doing research into different cells, and they've isolated, the cell that causes you to age, the cells that produce more brain activity. So somebody who has a higher intelligence, they've looked at their brain activity to see, like what type of proteins are being dumped into the brain at that time. So, they're already on ball saying that they've can cure aging, make you smarter, make you stronger, and make you better looking through gene therapy.
man, if they can make me better looking, that's some serious shit.
Watch out, ladies. Watch out.
The Kentucky gentleman's on the prowl.
But seriously, I just looked that story up on Reddit, and it's Stanford that's actually doing this. So,
oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, Stanford with the stroke victims and stuff, and they're basically saying dead centers of stroke victims and stuff that they're using the stem cells on, and showing it's showing that it's actually helping. I mean, it doesn't say it's reversing anything yet, but I mean, this is super early. So it's exciting news, and I hope it comes to fruition.
Well, and really, whoever discovers the first, successful trial, that's going to then relate and snowball into the next. I mean, if the stroke studies prove they can stop the stroke victims or, repair stroke damage, then, I mean, it's just going to roll right over into Alzheimer's and vice versa. So,
right.
I think a lot of good's going to come out of this.
All right. Well, that's good. What else you got for us there, Sean?
Well, after reading that story last week, it reminded me of a documentary I saw a long time ago. And this is what's funny. I watched a documentary about Dr. Robert White probably right around 8 or 10 years ago. I was just recently married, and I had this bulletin board in our office that I would just run in and write little notes down for myself to research later. One of them was, in big capital letters, Research Dr. Robert White, head transplant. And I forgot about this until probably about 2 months ago when I actually found the bulletin board, pulled it out, and I was reading old notes, and I read across Dr. Robert White, and I thought, well, who the hell was Dr. Robert White? I remembered a couple weeks ago when I read this news story. Dr. Robert White was the first doctor to successfully do a head transplant. And I'll get to that in a minute. But just to kind of give you a quick background on where he came from, he started off going to Catholic school, and during one class in biology or science, they were supposed to dissect a frog. Part of the beginning process was then to remove the skin, remove the brain, the skull cap, and expose the brain. One of his teachers walked by, and a passing comment said, "That's probably the cleanest and best skull removal I've ever seen. You should probably be a brain surgeon." So then you fast forward. He's a world-renowned neurosurgeon. He earned his medical degree from Harvard, and then he spent 6 years working for a Mayo Clinic, and then got his PhD from the University of Minnesota. While he was working in the Mayo Clinic, treating a lot of different patients for different ailments and injuries, he was oftentimes saddened by the fact that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how on point his work was, he could never fully restore patients with severe spinal damage. And he said it really hurt him because he'd see these patients come in hearing how good he was, how good his team was, with spinal injuries, and only to leave with little to no improvement. So what he wanted to do was look into possibly I guess you'd say transplanting brains, doing brain transplants, because if you could take somebody's brain from one body and put it to the next body, you would then give that person new life in a new body. So,
wait, this sounds like a Ryan Reynolds movie.
Well, what's interesting about this is, being that he's from the Catholic faith and going to school, in Catholic schools, he actually had support from the Vatican for his brain transplant studies and surgeries, because the Catholics believed, I don't know if they still do or not, but back around the 70s, they believed the soul was actually encapsulated in the brain. So if you could take somebody's brain from one body, move it to the other, you weren't going to compromise the soul, therefore you weren't going to kill the person. Therefore, they deemed it to be a very important study to be conducted. He actually was, what he says, friends with two popes, I believe, Paul VI and maybe John II. I probably butchered both of those, but yeah, good friends with two popes. So, going back to his surgeries,
the man with two popes.
The man with two popes. The dog with two brains. That's where we're going next. So he actually had the first successful brain transplant. He successfully transplanted one brain from a dog, the brain from one dog to that body of another dog. Now, you're probably thinking that he basically just scooped out the brain of dog A, removed dog B's brain, and dropped dog A's brain into dog B. Ergo, your dog who was Fido is now the mentality of Fluffy. That's not what really happened. Instead, he successfully removed the brain from dog A and then reattached it to rerouted arteries in dog B's body. So he attached the brain, for lack of better instruction, he attached it to the dog's neck, reattaching the arteries to the brain and then making kind of a skin pouch on the side of the dog. The dog woke up, recovered from the surgery, and then basically was the dog with two brains. They weren't able at that time to find out really if he could use both brains. Obviously, the brain's not necessarily connected to the spinal cord, but it was living. They said that the dog could get up, walk around, move around, and through electrical probes, they found that the secondary brain was showing brain activity.
Whoa, I don't think I've ever heard this story.
It's a pretty wicked story. So he thought to himself, this is pretty cool that I can do this. Basically, I can take one brain. What he would do was he'd super cool the brains. He'd induce hypothermia back then is what he was doing. Because that would kind of put it in, as we all know, a state of suspended animation. So the big ticket here, what he's most famously known for, and also earning himself another nickname of Dr. Frankenstein, he took two rhesus monkeys, perfected his surgery, and successfully took the head of one rhesus monkey and transplanted it on the body of the next rhesus monkey. So what everybody calls the first successful head transplant, he argues until he passed away in interviews, he did not do a head transplant, but instead a body transplant. Because it wasn't like, if you lose an arm, you get an arm transplant because you had a bad arm. This, he said, instead, because the brain and the head was still good, you basically got a body transplant because you got a new body on a functional brain. So what he did was take monkey A and monkey B, just like the dogs. He super cooled the heads, gave them, put them to sleep, not death, but basically just put them out. supercooled the heads, successfully surgically removed both heads. He took monkey A's head and successfully attached it to monkey B's body. He used a series of catheters and lengthened the arteries, shortened the arteries until he was successfully able to put the head onto monkey B's body. After they got all the arteries connected and, a pretty decent stitch job, they were then able to wake the head back up. The only problem they faced is that they weren't able to successfully reattach the spinal cord. That was the only problem. So the monkey's head did wake up. It's on video. You can go online and watch a lot of different documentaries and different videos. They've got the video of the monkey. The monkey wakes up. They were able to get it to respond to audio cues, visual stimulants, and also the mouth could move. They say it could smell. I don't know how we could tell that, but we're going to go with it. If it's blinking and moving its mouth, I'll bet it can probably smell. The mouth would even move. Some stories say the monkey was able to eat. Others say it was just able to respond to oral stimulation. They could take like a finger or a rubber straw and put it in the monkey's mouth. The jaw would bite down, the tongue would lick the straw, that type of deal. They said it was even able to follow you as you walked around the lab. The monkey would follow you and watch you move around. So they deemed that the first successful head transplant, also known as body transplant. The only problem is, surgery back then was not quite as sophisticated, although it was a very sophisticated operation. The monkey ended up dying. Some reports said after about a day and a half, some say up to 9 days, but ultimately the monkey did pass away because the body did end up, the immune system rejected. Yeah, it rejected the surgery, so the actual monkey did die.
Also, the brain, if I'm not mistaken, the monkey was paralyzed as well.
Right, like I said before, they couldn't reattach the spinal cord yet, so although it was still alive, it would then be, what do we call that, a quadriplegic?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was paralyzed, but it was, for that day and age, hell, for this day and age, that was a pretty successful deal to take, basically give a body a new head or give a head a new body. So,
right.
Dr. White ended up dying in 2010 at the ripe old age of 84. Some quick facts about him. He successfully did over 10,000, I shouldn't say successfully, he did over 10,000 surgeries, some of each lasted 18 hours long. During one surgery, a student reported that when he was working with a group of students, a student who was aiding him dropped a loaded syringe on his foot. It stuck into his foot like a javelin. He looked down, looked up at the kid and said, "Are you trying to kill the teacher?" Then finished the surgery before he removed the syringe out of his foot. He was also featured in GQ magazine. And this is what's cool to us nerds. He was a medical consultant for the X-Files I Want to Believe movie. So I haven't seen the movie yet, but it's kind of on our to-do list here in a couple of days. And then an update. There's an Italian surgeon named Sergio Canavero. I probably butchered that too. He says he's been following the studies and trying to improve Dr. White's research, and says that he believes that now we can use an inorganic polymer to help fuse/stitch the spine together. He believes that the surgeries can be successful, but only if they are mechanically, surgically made and cleanly severed. So they're saying there could be some more hope in actually reattaching spinal cords and maybe making a full-on body transplant.
Interesting.
So we got into that argument earlier about because I thought the guy that did this was Russian,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, no, totally American. No, Sean, you're totally wrong. There was a Russian scientist named Vladimir Dimitrov back in 1959 that successfully transferred one miniature dog head, a puppy head, onto a full-grown dog and connected all the arteries and ventricles and nerve endings, and it lived for 48 hours, 72 hours, somewhere like that.
Right. He even stitched the puppy's feet to the back of the dog's back.
Yes.
And so I guess you'd say I wasn't wrong, technically, because his name wasn't Dr. White, and he didn't transplant a monkey's head, but...
Boom!
But, yeah, so in this documentary, something that Preston and I talked about, the guy being like a Russian scientist, that's going to snowball me right into the next idea here of monkeys and transplants and everything else. Did you guys know that in 1920, Joseph Stalin planned a mutant monkey army?
What?
Okay, so Of course, fact is a bit stranger than fiction. I think in the same documentary, Preston, what made me think maybe this guy was a Russian mad scientist was I remember footage of human soldiers with gorilla heads marching down towards a swastika or what have you. So I think that's where maybe we're getting the idea that White was a Russian mad scientist. But basically, in the 1920s, Joseph Stalin was trying to restructure and rebuild the Red Army. And in the process of invigorating this new Red Army, he thought, what the hell? I want to have an army full of monkey soldiers, monkey men. The idea is that if he could make a hybrid monkey man mutant army, they wouldn't be opposed to any orders. They wouldn't have any biases towards the food they ate. They wouldn't complain about the shelter or the conditions of war. They wouldn't need nearly as much clothing or supplies. And most importantly, they wouldn't have the same morals that we do. They wouldn't have as many...
Morals?
Morals. It sounds fancy when I say morals. Like when I buy my shoes at Target.
Those are some damn happy monkeys.
Those are some damn happy monkeys. So they wouldn't have the same morals and wouldn't be held to the same accountability as humans. And most importantly, they'd be a hell of a lot stronger than humans. They say that, gorillas have the strength of 10 humans, so he was hoping that maybe they'd have the strength of about 4 or 5 humans. So enter Dr. Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov. This guy was a biologist whose claim to fame is that he helped perfect artificial insemination. He was able to actually prove that through artificial insemination, you could take a male horse and impregnate typically 20 to 30 female horses through the normal conditions of reproduction. With the artificial insemination, he proved that you could inseminate from one male horse up to 500 female horses through artificial insemination. So Stalin thought, hey, that's pretty awesome. You think you can make a monkey man? And Ivanovich, I'm sorry, I called him Ivanovich. That's probably not right. Ivanov, my God, that was a long pause. He said, yeah, probably do that. We can make Zorses, which is a male horse to a female, a male zebra to a female horse. We can make ligers and other strange, cryptids. So yeah, I could probably make a monkey man.
A liger is my favorite animal.
So he said, what the hell, I'll make a monkey man. So he flies down to Africa and does some research down in, I'm going to butcher this as well, Conakry, Guinea in Africa. He took 3 female chimps, and artificially inseminated them with human sperm. But that was no good. It didn't work, it just got rejected immediately. So he thought, well, that's probably backwards. I bet I could do it with 5 female humans and use male monkey sperm. So he thought, I'll just go to one of these local hospitals and see if I can just get 5 girls to sign up. I bet that'll be pretty easy. So he jets into the hospital. He looks for 5 volunteers to give him all the authorization to go ahead and impregnate them with monkey chimp DNA. Surprise, surprise, nobody volunteered, and he went back hanging his head in shame. So he figured, well, shit, I'm kind of at the end of my line. I guess I'll try one more thing. So there are documented reports of one woman coming forward in Russia who was known only by Woman G. That's the only documentation they have of who she was. She came forward and said, yeah, my life's pretty shit right now. I guess I'll just donate my life to science. So he gets her ready. He's about ready to impregnate her, only to find out the last chimp he has in his possession died. So, unfortunately, he was not able to be successful to impregnate any women with monkeys with women, no monkey army. Stalin got a little bit pissed off. And then, I think 1930, during his political purge, he arrested Ivanov and some of the other scientists in the area, sentenced him to 5 years in exile, and about 2 years in 1935, the biologist passed away. So we were not able to have a successful monkey army for poor Stalin. But the idea of ligers and zonkies and zorses and mules also bring up the idea of humansies. That's what supposedly he was going to coin his monkey army, was human chimpanzees. So have you guys heard of the classic case of Oliver the Humanzee?
I have not.
Okay.
I'm sure you're going to enlighten us.
Well, yes. So in the 1970s, right around the same time we're putting monkey heads on other monkeys' bodies, There was a monkey by the name, I shouldn't say monkey, a chimpanzee by the name of Oliver who surfaced. Some say late 60s, some say early 70s. We'll split the difference. He was acquired by animal trainers Frank and Janet Berger, who are famous, if you guys remember, on the Ed Sullivan Show. They would take their dogs, their chimps, their ponies, and their pigs and be featured at the Radio City Music Hall. So he came from Africa. I believe Frank's brother sent him over with some other chimps that he reportedly caught in the Congo. The only problem was Oliver, even as a baby, didn't exhibit some of the same features as normal chimpanzees. He was bipedal almost his entire life, so he walked on his hind legs, never using all fours. He never walked on his knuckles. He preferred the company of humans to chimpanzees. Other chimpanzees wouldn't get along with him. And some of the other really cool stuff, as he grew up, he also would drink coffee in the mornings. He preferred a cup of coffee just like the humans had. After Frank and Janet had to get rid of Oliver due to I said before he really preferred the company of humans. Right around the time he hit about 16 years old, he started being attracted to the ladies, just not the chimps. He was going after Mrs. Berger and other human females. So Mrs. Berger decided that that was a little bit too threatening for her. She wasn't all about it, so they ended up having to get rid of him. So one of his later owners said, and I'm going to read this off to you, he quotes, "You could send Oliver on all sorts of chores. He would take the wheelbarrow, empty the hay and the straw from the stalls. When it was time to feed the dogs, he would get the pans and mix the dog food for me. I'd get it ready, he'd mix it," she said. As he grew older, Oliver also acquired habits normally enjoyed by humans, including the morning cup of coffee. He even enjoyed a nightcap. This guy, Oliver, enjoyed sitting down at night and having a drink with me and watching TV. He even learned to mix his own nightcaps. He would pour a shot of whiskey, put some 7-Up in the cup, stir it, and drink it. That was his favorite nightcap. He also displayed emotional cues like humans did, not found on a lot of chimpanzees, including when the Bergers got rid of him. He actually cried tears of remorse and suffered from severe temporary separation anxiety. So that was pretty interesting stuff. Unfortunately, the humanzee, as they were calling him, didn't stay in perfect captivity with his human owners for long. He was eventually sold off to a research company. But the interesting thing about it was the research company never got around to doing any experiments on him because of just how relaxed and how cool he was. They said he spent most of his time in the lab, kicking back, drinking coffee, and just kind of cutting up with the humans. He spent a lot of time in freak shows, in circuses. They were parading him around as, the half man, half ape. And a lot of people reported watching his show saying it was more like seeing a space alien than it was seeing a monkey. A animal trainer that had him toward the end of his life in the 80s said, here's a classic example of weird things that he would do. Very often I would sit him down in the living room with me to drink a cup of coffee. One time, he was out of coffee. I never trained him how to do this. Maybe he knew of it from his past. He got up from the table, walked to the kitchen, picked up the coffee pot, poured himself a cup, then poured enough into my cup to top it off. Then he took the pot back to the kitchen. He said the only problem in the story is he's just a chimp. He's not a human. He made a terrible mess. But the cool thing was his brain told him what to do. He knew he was supposed to get the pot, pour the coffee, and then offer me coffee as well. He spilled coffee all over the place, all over his body. But he understood all the elements that fit that, I'm out of coffee, you're out of coffee, let's get some more coffee. Later on, like I said, he was sold to a research company. They didn't do a lot of research on him. Unfortunately, he was kept in a small cage, which gave him severe arthritis, some bone problems. Some of the complications led him to be blind later on, though he did live a pretty happy life until he did pass away in captivity with, I believe, 11 other chimps, reportedly even having a girlfriend who was a female chimp who had kind of the same disposition. Now, the idea was that they didn't know where he came from. They thought he was a humanzee, meaning a man had sex with a monkey, or vice versa. It was reported early that he had 47 chromosomes, one more than a human, one less than a chimp. Through studies later on in his life, it was proved he did have 48 chromosomes, and more likely his mutation was a result of being a normal chimpanzee which bred with a pygmy chimp in the wild, thus giving him a smaller head, a flatter face, and other, odd, not quite typical chimpanzee features. But yeah, that's the story of the chimpanzee who was the humanzee.
All right. So to kind of keep with the animal theme here a little bit, and I came across this story that I thought was kind of interesting. That in 1882 there was a iron-hulled cargo ship, basically German. Basically, it's just a giant metal ship. They were out working on it when one of the little, they usually had like boys that worked on these ships, and a 15-year-old child was thrown off the ship and into the water, and they tried to as they tried to save him, all of a sudden this huge bird came flying out of the sky and attacked the boy. It basically flew down and started pecking at the boy in the water. And when I say this bird was huge, they said its wingspan was 14 feet long. So we're talking a huge bird. It attacked this boy. As the sailors on the ship yelled for help, the boy actually ducked underneath into the water, which confused the bird. So the bird's like, "Where'd the boy go?" Well, at this time, another bird had showed up, another giant bird, and the bird attacked a man named Banning who was on the ship, and when the boy came back up, though, both the birds attacked the boy again. In fact, they tried to take off with him. They swooped down.
Swooped, yeah, it's a common attack formation.
They swooped down, picked the boy up, and started to fly away with him. One of the sailors shot the bird in the wing and broke the wing off.
Yowza!
And so the boy fell to the water. Luckily, he wasn't injured, and the birds were killed, and apparently, this is the 1800s, so who knows what happened to the bird. But we've heard a lot of stories in the last couple of years about large birds, particularly in Alaska. I heard the same kind of stories of a 14-foot long wingspan. A pilot in a Cessna had seen a bird when he was flying over Alaska, and he swears that the wingspan was as big as his plane, and his plane was 14 feet wide. So, and there's a lot of those giant bird stories out there. I've heard them over like the last couple of years. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting story. I always like reading about these old-timey stories because you're like, how much of this is really true? How much of this is just to sell newspapers?
Well, back in the olden days, we called those harpies. All the old sailors used to report being attacked by harpies.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes you get attacked by harpies on the internet as well. So, oh man. Hood rat attack harpies.
Hood rat attack harpies. Never forget.
So, but like I said, I thought that was a pretty interesting story, and there was newspapers back in the early 1900s and 1800s that claimed that, in the Old West there were, people hunting down pterodactyls with lassos. So, probably this story isn't true, but it's still an interesting read. I'll put it in the show notes, and you can read the entire transcript of what happened. It was pretty long, and I didn't really feel like reading it because, the show's already running late. Not late, but it's going to be. So we're going to move on to, since we're talking about giant birds, we're going to actually move into what Preston's main topic was today. He's been speaking about giants. So, Preston, take it away.
So, giants. If historically we look at the topic of giants, we find that as far as back as the Bible goes, they start to talk about giants. And so in Genesis, the passage I think starts off that the Ben Yah Elohim, which translates into the sons of God, basically started to notice the daughters of men and were like, ooh la la. and decided to take some for their wives, and their offspring were called the Nephilim, or the men of renown, which later ended up becoming what we would call in today's term giants. And, you know, if you go forward from there, a lot of the stories just basically read like fairy tales, and there's not too many common themes. In most cases, if we try to find some common links, the one thing that we do find is the height. And that's the one thing I want to focus on all these stories, where I think that there's a good connection there, that we could actually prove that maybe some of these cases are real, has to deal with the actual height of these said creatures. And if we go back to Genesis, and they talk about the Nephilim, so they're broken down into tribes. So you have the Anakites, the Emites, the Amorites, and the Rephites. And if we get to David and Goliath, and the Bible, or just in the earlier form, of let's say the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says Goliath was 4 cubits and a span, which in their terms was about 6 feet 7 inches. And then when it got translated into King James, it changed to 9 feet 9 inches. And if we fast forward all the way to where the modern day encounters of giants happen, we're going to fast forward to the 1700s and 1800s. One of the earliest encounters here in America was in 1754 with George Washington. Now, George Washington was a colonel of the Virginia militia, and when hostilities broke out with France, he supervised the construction of Fort Loudon in Winchester, Virginia. And when they were digging the foundations for this fort, they came across a cemetery of 7-foot-tall skeletons that they believed at that time to roughly just be Native Americans due to the artifacts that were buried with them. So right off the bat, 7 foot. Yes, Sean?
I'm just enjoying the show.
And then, let me scroll up to here. Even earlier, when the Spanish were around in the Colorado area, early reports of 1521, Francisco Gardello was in the California coast and was taking Native American slaves. They captured roughly 70 Native American slaves. But they came across a tribe called the Duar, and the Duar were described as roughly being Europeans, or 7 foot tall, red to brown hair with gray eyes. And then when we started to Christianize some of the Native Americans right before the Civil War, or right after the Civil War, the Paiutes have this little tale that
oh shit! You're delving into my story here.
Ooh.
Oh, you got the Paiutes?
Yeah.
Nerd fight.
Okay, so no. We'll let you tell that one. But I wanted to focus in on, so in the 1800s in Indiana, we have that in March in 1880, a company of gravel road workers were excavating gravel from the bank on a ridge at the southwest corner of the Newport Fairgrounds, and they found 5 human skeletons along the banks of the railroad, roughly 7 feet 2 inches in height. Then if we jump over to 1874 in Ohio County, a giant in 1872 was found in a complete skeleton in the Rockport area, and the jawbone was so large that it fitted over the lower portion of the man's face that found it.
Rockport is about 30 minutes from here, 45 minutes from where I live.
Right on.
So
you weren't going to talk about that one, were you?
Well, I was going to actually talk about the mound builders in this area, but which may tie a lot into these giants and stuff. But you go ahead and tell your story. I'm not going to step on your toes, but yeah, I just wanted people to know that Rockport, Indiana, is really close to here. So, again, when I tell you guys stories about, hey, the 37th parallel or whatever, this is the shit that they talk about. So, we'll continue, Preston.
I'm trying to see on this story it just says it was in Finchville, so I'm going to assume that this was in Ohio too, because it was part of a book. Basically, there was a cemetery, town cemetery of Finchville, and in the top of the cemetery there was a mound, and the family started to dig into it to bury one of the family members that had just died, and they ended up finding 5 bodies buried inside this mound that were 7 feet 8 inches in length, and again buried with Native American, or seemed to be Native American artifacts. So if you start looking through all these stories, you find that anywhere between 6 feet 7 inches, 6 feet 9 inches, all the way up to about 9 feet seems to be the average height for these individuals. And then mostly when they're here in the the Americas, when we look at North America, we find that a lot of them are buried with Native American artifacts. And as far as the red hair goes, there were reports that when the Peloponnesians migrated to Hawaii, there was a race of individuals that were there that were roughly, 7 feet, 8 feet tall, that had red hair, light colored skin, and were assholes. They basically didn't want to hang out with the Peloponnesians and decided to get the fuck off of the island. We're like, deuces, see you later.
Peloponnesians were like the Rudolphs of the Giants.
And so I found this story that was posted a while back about in Canada called the Valley of the Headless Men, and it's all over the internet. The one article that I found that was written really well was actually on Mysterious Universe by one of their authors there. But in the Nahanni Valley up in Canada, which is way, way up there, it's actually turned into a national park, and it's one of the historic sites for Canada. There was a tribe called the Dene, which were described as warriors who wore mask and armor, and that the men wielded strange, powerful weapons that no one had seen before, and were described as being very tall in stature. A lot of reports for this valley, the reason why it got its name, in the early 1800s, when people were going up there to prospect for gold, they would go missing, and when they would find them, they would be decapitated, and they, had no heads. And a lot of the legends said that the Dene were, tall in stature, were very standoffish with people, kind of like, the Peloponnesians, these red-haired giants were kind of assholes. And then they slowly, over time, just kind of disappeared, and nobody had contact with them. And I like to, 411, the missing 411 cases. One of those cases that had the little boy that went missing, when the family that had the son of the same name, and I can't remember the kid's name, but let's just make one up and say Tim. The family the other family that had been there in that park that day, when they heard this blood-curdling scream and they looked over, they saw this very tall individual with, long shaggy hair, carrying what looked like to be a small child over his shoulder. And then here in Canada, you have this valley called, the Valley of the Headless Men, and people go missing up there. And I sometimes wonder, are we mistaking encounters with what people call Sasquatch or Bigfoot actually to be remnants of these giants? Maybe these are Neanderthal, like just a species of humans that are just kind of taller than we are, and that's what we're encountering, and it's really not Bigfoot at all. Sean?
There actually was a giant sighting in Mexico not too long ago, near, I think it was Puebla and Morelos in central Mexico. At the Popocatépetl volcano, some hikers reported seeing some giants that were right around, I think they said 8.5 foot tall, that were scaling the side of this active volcano. And they claim that they were moving faster than humanly possible. They said they had extremely good climbing skills, agility, and were running at amazing speeds. The hiker who turned this in said, the footprints are very large. The part corresponding to the heel leaves a hole, something that resembles a claw, which apparently serves them like a propulsive support, kind of like an owl or any other clawed creature.
Never heard that story either.
Can't say that now.
To get back to what Preston was talking about earlier, when I was going to talk about the Paiute. How did you say it? The Paiutes? Paiute?
Paiute.
They had legends of the Sitika, which babies were red-headed cannibals that they had a war with, and apparently they had they would attack the Native Americans and they would eat their dead, and they were having issues. They were having a war with these things, and eventually to stop them, they had to team up with other tribes, and these other tribes all attacked the red-headed giants and basically forced them into a cave called Lovelock Cave, and then put a bunch of brush in front of the cave and lit it on fire, and that's how they ended up killing them all. And the cave eventually collapsed, but they found it again, all these skeletons in 1911. They found this cave, and when they opened up the cave, it was just, all the bones and stuff were covered in bat guano. Now, this was like a gold mine for them, because guano was a very fancy fertilizer back then. Guano. So they made a fortune off of buying this or selling this fertilizer, and in the process, a lot of these bodies were damaged beyond recognition because they didn't tell archaeologists or anything about this until 1912, an entire year later. And a lot of the artifacts and everything were destroyed from this cave. And something else I thought was very interesting as well is they said also a lot of the bodies were sold to fraternal organizations for initiation purposes. So that maybe ties into the whole Freemasons and why would they have these giants' bodies to use for initiations? I thought that was kind of an interesting story. But even the chieftain's daughter, I don't know when she existed or whatever, but basically she had even told this legend that this really happened, and it was passed down to her and stuff. But yeah, so that was the.
Getting back to the story, like with the bones being used for initiation, in the 20s, if you go back up into Ohio, where the North American pyramids are, like the big dirt mounds and all the mounds up there. During the Depression, a lot of people started to dig into the side of those and uncovered, just like a wealth of like treasure and like kind of like what I would call like out of place artifacts. And ended up selling them to a lot of the museums in the area, or like selling them to the Smithsonian underneath the table. And a lot of the museums, the stories go that the museums didn't quite know what to do with it because a lot of them looked Egyptian, or they might have been kind of Roman-like artifacts, and so they just kind of, whenever they had a display about like the Roman time period, they would just kind of throw these artifacts in, and nobody would ever knew that they illegally bought them from people.
Right.
So, and then you also have reports of shop owners that they would dig up these skeletons when they were paving the towns in the city, and they were digging up to make the roadways. They would find these skeletons, and Bob's Country Bunker would take the 7-foot skeleton, put it into his shop window, and be like, "Hey, come see the giant for 10 cents."
Right.
And charge people 10 cents to look at this giant skeleton. So,
well, something I wanted to bring up here is that you keep talking about the mounds. Well, in the area that I live in, right across the river, there's a bunch of these mounds where they have a museum and everything. It's called Angel Mounds. And basically they tell a lot of the history at this museum about the mound people and, the mound builders and stuff. And this is all along the river, Ohio River and stuff. You hear a lot of these stories. But years ago, I came across this really interesting book called The History of Henderson, Kentucky. And you're probably thinking, oh, this sounds kind of stupid, kind of boring. But I was really interested in it because I always wanted to know the history, because this is old. This is taken from old texts and stuff about the founding of Henderson. I was like, I want to read into this. So I came across this book and I was floored with some of the shit in there, because it has all kinds of supernatural stuff in here, like as well. Like they talk about the milk sickness, where basically people got sick, their body temperature dropped, they were like freezing to death in the middle of summer. Just weird shit like that. Stuff that, it's weird stuff that you don't hear about very often. Well, one of the things that caught my attention in chapter 2 on page 23 of this book, it says, modern Indians never inhabited Henderson County, yet all along the riverfront and in many other interior locations of this county, the remains of some races of people are found in great numbers. The entire riverfront, from First Street up to 5 or 6 squares, seems to have been one vast burial ground, as hundreds of skeletons, bones, and relics have been taken therefrom by extractions into the employ of the city. It is generally conceded, however, that the Indians were not the Aborigines of Kentucky, but there was, prior to their coming, a class of white people known as the mound builders. So there you even have them talking about these mound builders and stuff back in the 1800s, late 1800s, as a fact that they existed here. They were Aboriginals. They weren't the Native Americans we're fucking, we talk about all the time. These were something that came before, and they're European descent. That even seems to go back to the giant stories and stuff. I mean, they don't tell how big these corpses and stuff were, but it's still interesting. Like the red-headed giants we talked about earlier, they would cannibalize their dead, the dead, but also when they found the cave, when they opened up the cave, they found lots of femurs and stuff that were cracked open so the marrow could be sucked out. And this was a lot of times that people resorted to cannibalism because of famine. And so, there's a chance that they weren't cannibals to begin with, but they found somebody weaker than them, and they were hungry. I mean, you have a bad winter, your people are going to starve to death. Here are these weak, soft humans that you can break in half and eat. Nom, 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 nom.
Let me counterpoint that and say, why don't we have giants anymore? Maybe it's because we got hip to the fact that there weren't too many of them, and if we ate a giant, it'd last about 3 times as long as a human. So we could have eaten these puppies straight into extinction.
Well, I don't think we were necessarily eating them. I think we just killed them.
I think we ate them.
But, I just thought that was an interesting story for Henderson County, about the whole, the First Street and everything, just seeing all those corpses laying there when they come to the city. I mean, what kind of idiot would be like, yep, this is the perfect place I want to live. Look at all these corpses.
Wait a second.
Ta-da!
I love the view.
So, but...
Well, in China, was it like back in the 70s or 80s, they uncovered some tombs that actually had fairly tall individuals. I don't know the exact measurements, but so you expect that when they find mummified bodies in ancient China that they would be in fact Chinese, and they were actually of European descent. They had the painted tattoos on the face, and they had the red hair. That story that I told earlier about the Dua that the Spanish conquistador encountered over on the coast of California. They reported that the Dua had the painted face, which relates back to a tribe of people from Ireland that were really violent and really tall. So just kind of did they just kind of intermingle in with society, and we just kind of bred that out a little bit, or did we just, because they were such assholes and very warring, that we just kind of killed them off, or like Sean said, we just decided.
I think we just teamed up and killed them off because there wasn't as many of them. That's what I would believe.
But maybe they are the reason why we have missing 411. Maybe we haven't killed them all off, and for whatever reason, they're stealing people.
But come on, did they build the robot grandma? Come on.
You don't know.
If we haven't talked about that, let's talk about that next time, because that's a pretty good story.
All right, guys.
Poop on the sticky paper, Rob. Poop on the sticky paper.
Now here, one more thing. When we talk about giants, you could jump on the Guinness Book of World Record and see that the world's tallest man borders 8.5 foot tall, sometimes near 9 foot tall. Go ahead.
What I would think about this too, though, is you're going to have those abnormalities. That's the word I'm looking for. But when you're seeing a whole race of people that are over 7 feet tall, that's when I would be concerned about giants, because they're not as big as the legends tell us. But if you see, a tribe of 100 people that are 7.5 feet tall, and everybody in the village is that tall, it's going to be a bit freakier than just this one freakishly large person in a group.
That's true. I would probably think instantly when I saw a tribe of them, I'd think, man, I'm going to be able to eat for a year.
Yeah.
Killed all of them, ate half of
them. Anyway,
drop the mic, walk away, Sean.
So I think we should probably end this show, and God, I hope this went well, because there was twice that I accidentally paused my fucking shit. So I'm going to have to rebuild all this together. Luckily, I was keeping timestamps, so hopefully I can get all this leveled out.
Yeah, he'll get it.
But
instead of a personal anecdote, if nobody has a story, I'm going to at least ask you a hard-hitting question.
All right.
If, in popular culture, the witching hour, and argued the devil's hour, is 3 o'clock in the morning, right? So possessions, demons, creepies, crawlies, all tend to do their biddings right around 3 o'clock in the morning. Do these same demons honor daylight savings time?
No, they don't give a fuck about
daylight savings time didn't exist when the demons started this stuff. The same way in the National Treasure, daylight savings time didn't exist, and that's why they found the shadow on the clock or whatever, so they could find that brick. Because daylight savings time didn't exist. So.
Okay, what about time zones?
Time zones, look, demons don't give a fuck. They do what they want to do.
Yeah. You have to figure out what the universal 3 a.m. is, and that's what the demons go by. They don't give a fuck about time zones. They're on their own demon time, and that's what they use. And
at 3 a.m., she gets lonelier.
They're on God's time. They're on God's 3 a.m. That's what
Thank
time
you
use.
much.
I read an interesting
Not Sean's specific time.
I read an interesting article about somebody's explanation for the witching hour. Somebody said, well, why do we even call it the witching hour? Why are things so much more creepy at 3? This guy's explanation was pretty sweet. He said, basically, if you go to bed, let's imagine at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, while you're sleeping, your body loses its REM cycle, your deep sleep, your bladder's full, you have to pee. So on average, most people get up around 2 to 4 a.m. to take a leak or get a drink. You're in that weird period where you're still kind of half asleep, half awake. Therefore, any noise you hear or any creak in the floor, you automatically assume, what the hell was that noise? Was that a monster?
What the fuck? Something's going on with my internet.
It's not even starting at 3.
The demons don't like you making fun of their hour.
That's right. You did this.
All right. We should probably end this before can you guys hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I want to end this before it gets too bad. So why don't you get your plugs in there, Sean?
Okay, if you guys have any listener stories or want to send us any stories you've read, send those stories to our email, pixelatedparanormal@gmail.com. And our phone number, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, 312-772 5874.
I don't think that's it at all, actually. I don't think that is it at all.
You foiled me again. This is a number Kush has on the website.
Oh, is that okay? Well, that may be it then. Wait, that may be his number. Are you sure?
Ooh,
Type in Pixelated Paranormal.
You know what? Patty's mom's going to call the wrong number.
She's called back. She called back the other night.
No way.
Yes.
Oh, I thought we had a conversation. I called Patty's mom, and the last we left, she was going to have Patty, quote, unquote, taken care of. That's what she said.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah, our voicemail is 707-520-4263. That's 707-520-4263. The number Sean gave out was to contact Pixelated Radio or Pixelated Sausage Cast. So
Rob,
those are not who you want to leave your stories with.
You need to get on to our host daddy and tell him that he messed up.
No, it's not. That's just contact the sausage. That's his numbers over there. That's who.
We need to update our fans. That's why we haven't been getting anything, because our fans are probably calling him.
We have it we have our voicemail number in our actual episodes. It doesn't matter.
Oh, it matters.
All right.
Because Patty's mom is the only person that calls.
Yeah.
So.
Preston, what do you want to plug?
Really the only thing, like I feel like I'm just harping on the audience. Rate us on iTunes. Give us good reviews that gets us out there and makes us better. If they're bad, we learn from it. But rate and review us so more people will pick up on the show. And pay attention to our Facebook page and the videos that we make. Kind of tease what we're going to be doing, and that's really it.
All right. And I want to plug the Sports Unleashed podcast with my host from Pixelated Radio, Richard Hall. I also want to plug the Pixelated Radio podcast itself with me, Corey, Rich, and Mark. And I also wanted to, I'm going to have a message here at the end of the show from my friend Derek, which I talked about, last episode when we talked about the clowns, the Phantom Clown incident. He reached out to me, or we were talking back and forth, and, he'd been a friend of mine since like third grade, and then we kind of drifted away, but, his cousin is fighting a battle with leukemia, and he says, I want to do a fundraiser, and he wanted me to put a message there at the end of it. So I'm going to do that. And also he's got a GoFundMe page for his cousin as well. And I'll put that in the show notes. So, if you want to donate, if you can't, obviously a lot of our listeners are probably not from here. So, but 15-year-old dude with leukemia, man, that's got to be rough.
Yeah.
It's not that time of your life that you want to have, especially that happen, So, we wish his name's also Preston, so, he's got a good name.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, guys, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening and, enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. My name is Derek Nance, and I am here to invite our listeners to the Preston's Pack Hunting for a Cure Cruise In and Barbecue event. This event is in support for my 15-year-old cousin Preston Lewis's battle against leukemia. It will be held on Saturday, June 18th at the Green River Road location of O'Reilly's Auto Parts in Evansville, Indiana. We will be selling barbecue dinners and holding a silent auction, as well as showing off many cool classic cars. So if you are in the Evansville metro area, please join us in helping Preston beat this awful disease, and thank you to Henderson Man and the Pixelated Sausage Podcast for your time and assistance.